A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth. Salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquath and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Rukwai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying and exhorting lesson. And I pray and sincerely hope that this lesson may be comforting to you. So for today's topic, I wanted to touch on this aspect of self-respect. I wanted to touch on this topic in regards to certain family members and how a lot of our certain family members are not right. So essentially, not to allow them to mistreat you, because sometimes in certain situations, you might have had close relationships with some of these family members, but realizing that, through and time again, as you go through certain experiences, you realize, they see you as somebody they can just, walk all over and essentially to take advantage of you and not to allow that. But a lot of it sometimes also comes, with essentially to distance ourselves from some of these people, because they don't have a certain level of reverence for Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, which produces a sentiment, which produces better conduct, a more cultivated, noble conduct. But our people lack that. They try and pay attention to essentially other areas, or they don't see it. They don't see their conduct as a problem. So, I kind of wanted to touch on this, as a bit of exhortation, coupled with some experience, in regards to family members, because, and this is not to say that all of them, are would be a problem or a thorn in your side, but how to deal with it essentially, properly, and still remain peaceable. But at the same time, sometimes situations can arise where you have to distance yourself, either physically or even maybe mentally, from them, right? Because they're just not within their character and their treatment towards you. They don't see the value in treating you or regarding the things that you might want to do for them, whether it might be a good deed that they ask you for. What I'm saying? Jake is very if there's anything I've noticed about our people, is that they've prioritized getting rich in the wrong areas. And when I say rich, I'm not specifically speaking about money, because you can have a lot of our people are rich, in a carnal sense, but they're not essentially rich towards the Lord in terms of their conduct. And a lot of the essentially fruits of the spirit, they don't have a lot of these qualities to be able to actually have them produce an upright individual, because that's how we're created to be in the first place, because the scriptures talk about how Jacob was a plain man, dwelling in tents, right? Someone who is upright, that's the way we were designed to be. But essentially our people are they don't understand that they are basically walking around malfunctioning, right? So, I kind of wanted to, do some exhortation on this, for brothers that might actually live, with family, or, or even you have to distance yourself from some of these family members, right? But, still remaining, peaceable with whoever, right? Like if the shoe fits, wear it. Right? So, let me start off with this precept here in Sirach. This is Sirach chapter 10, verse 28 in the GNT here, and it says, "And my child, keep your self-respect, but remain modest. Value yourself at your own true worth. There is no excuse for a person to run himself down. No one respects a person who has no respect for himself." It says, that was the point, actually. I'll read that again in verse 29. It says, "There is no excuse for a person to run himself down. No one respects a person who hasn't respect for himself. So that's really, a core element of this equation as well when I say about, dealing with a lot of these family members, because sometimes, we put ourselves in situations where, we actually may have had terrible relationships, and you're trying to actually make a sincere effort to, improve that relationship, but it takes, at the same time, it requires it takes two to tango. That's what I'm saying. Because some family members, they might actually scoff at you, they might call you names, this and that and forth. Some of them might be peaceable to dwell with you, and then there's some of them that, a lot of them, I should say, a lot of them are just not right in their spirit, right? So you distance yourself from those, in particular, right? Not every family member is going to be a believer, but at the same time, our healthy mindset is to see ourselves as people who are valuable, because that is something that, Esau well, yes, Esau has done a good job in destroying, defacing the images and defacing our Lord and Savior. So we don't see ourselves as people who are important. We don't see ourselves as people, that, are upstanding individuals, because we have bad templates in our environment of how a righteous man or a righteous woman should conduct themselves. Our righteousness, we associate that with, for example, like Will Smith or Jada Smith. We see these people as righteousness, right? Esau has done a very good job in destroying the way we think about ourselves, right? Through his strongholds, his whitewashing, so-called whitewashing, right? So he's been a very instrumental part of that. But also there's another part of that, of why we see ourselves as, we see ourselves as inferior. One, because we're destroyed for lack of knowledge, like it says in Hosea, the 4th chapter. And then secondly, sometimes it's just bad nurturing that we had to deal with, because, whether it was a situation that you may have come up from, with between your parents, and, a lot of our, I'll say it like this, a lot of our women, are very disgruntled about, certain ways and certain things that happen to them between them and your father. And because of that, they take that energy, that negative energy, out on the child, right? So now you're growing up with a sort of a niggas ain't shit type of attitude, right? And you're growing up with these thoughts in your head, and then you're thinking that you're worthless. You're thinking that you're inferior. You're thinking that you're less of a person. Those sorts of, though and those sorts of, how do I call those? Those are just bad seeds to be able to be cultivated in an unhealthy environment. That's not healthy at all. Not to go too off topic, but I remember, a few, I don't know if I did a lesson on this, but the point really is, I remember I was doing some research on Alexander the Great. Now, although he's not of our nation, he's of our people, when you go into his childhood, his mother was very, very nurturing towards him. She encouraged him. She made sure, even though that, a lot of the history she was talking about was false and stuff like that. But the point is, a part of his nurturing and his childhood, it was the fact that he had an extremely nurturing mother. And that is something, one of the reasons we have a very broken element of self-respect and how we see ourselves, because you can't see yourselves as, as a nigger, or some, or as a Pookie or a Ray Ray. We don't see ourselves like that. You have to see yourself as somebody, as a prince, someone who is being cultivated in the eyes of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, to be able to actually properly govern, your own household, right? To properly, to be essentially be a noble, because that's what we were created to be in the first place, right? Jacob was somebody, we're overseers, we're people who are, should be in authority, but we just don't conduct ourselves as such, right? But nevertheless, that's really the point of the equation, of why we allow certain family members to mistreat us, is because, we have a poor self-perception of how we see ourselves. We don't see ourselves as people, um as a noble. And on top of that, because of that, we allow, what's the word I'm looking for, we allow bad habits from these people because we don't establish boundaries. That's another thing too, because when you actually have a healthier self-respect about yourself and value yourself as an individual, what you're going to do is create boundaries between these people and know that these boundaries, they can't cross them. You know what I'm saying? So um let me just go back. Let me go across to the 33rd chapter. Just bear with me on this. This is Sirach chapter 33, um, verse 19, and it says, "Give not thy son, and thy wife, or thy brother, or thy friend to power over thee while thou livest, and give not thy goods to another, lest they repent thee, and thou entreat for the same again. As long as thou livest and hast breath in thee, give not thyself over to any. For it's better it is that thy children should seek to thee than thou shouldest stand to their courtesy." So we're not standing in their courtesy, just because, sometimes, we, okay, yes, we grew up together, they're family members. You know what I'm saying? Like, we don't do, especially if they have a bad track record. If they have a bad track record, you realize, like, okay, you know what? This is not profiting me anything. This is not, this is actually causing me more grief, stress, and harm than good. And I need to cut back. I need to pull my, my good sentiments back. This is not healthy for me, because it really takes two to lift a couch, right? And a lot of these people, that we're related to, they're just not right. I'm sorry. Sorry to say it like that. They're just not, right within their spirit. So you have to distance yourself from, these people, right? So, I wanted to read this real quick, just to give an example, of one of our forefathers that, essentially had to distance themselves because of this, mistreatment, right? Because this is really, really important, but you still want to be able to be peaceable, with those who you can be peaceable with, right? But, not extending your favors and charity to people who don't actually show you appreciation. Because here it is, the Lord opened your mind. As the scripture said, we have this treasure in earthen vessels, and then they don't actually appreciate, the fact that, okay, they're in contact with a man who actually fears the Lord. And that, what does that do? It produces, healthier conduct. They don't actually even appreciate that. You know what I'm saying? So, I just wanted to read this real quick. This is Genesis 31, verse 1. I want to read down a couple verses. And then the topic here, it says Jacob flees from Laban, right? So Jacob basically, his father Isaac basically gives him some, an instruction, don't go onto the daughters of Canaan, but, go onto, go work and meet your mom's side of the family, basically, right? So basically, that's So, like I said, it's Jacob flees from Laban, and it says here. Now, this is verse 1, and I want to read down in the NLT, and it says here, but Jacob soon learned that Laban's sons were grumbling about him, and Jacob. So this is what they said. This is what they were saying, grumbling about. Jacob has robbed our father of everything. They said he has gained all this wealth at our father's expense. Right. Meanwhile, Jacob is really the one that's doing, the work, right? And it says Jacob began to notice there's a change in Laban's attitude towards him. And the Lord Yahweh said unto Jacob, return to the land of your father and your grandfather and all your relatives there, and I will be with you. So Jacob called Rachel and Leah, and out of the field where he was watching his flock. And he said to them, I have noticed that your father's attitude towards me has changed, but the Most High of my father has been with me. I know how hard I have worked for your father. Well, here it is. Here's the kicker. But he has cheated me, changing my wages 10 times. But the Most High, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, has not allowed him to do me any harm, right? Because Jacob was still conducting himself in an upright attitude. He didn't try and steal his flocks. He was still dealing with him very peaceably and still in sentiment and maintaining his integrity, right? Yes, there is the flip side, the spiritual aspect of this situation where you can say, okay, yes, Jacob was, this was just a trial, of this was in his example of suffering, right? But I'm kind of more touching on the point about, yes, this is Jacob was suffering, but on the flip side and the aspect, it doesn't justify what Laban was doing to Jacob, right? So here it says, for if he said, I'm sorry, the speckled animals will be your wages. The flock began to produce speckled young, and when he changed his mind and said the striped animals would be your wages, then the whole flock produced striped young. In this way, the Most High has taken your father's animals and given them to me, because he's trying to cheat Jacob, right? Jacob is basically was very profitable to Laban in this situation here, working for him. And it says here, one time during mating season, I had a dream that all the male goats mating with the females were streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then in my dream, the angel said unto me, Jacob, and I replied, yes, here I am. And the angel said, look up, and you will see that only the streaked, speckled and spotted males are mating with the females of your flock, for I have seen how Laban treated you. Right. So here it is. Jacob, is in this dream, and he has this, vision from an angel. The Lord, sees your affliction of how these relatives treat you as well. Because that's really, you deal with them in sincerity and integrity, and actually still maintaining a fear of the Lord, because trust me, it's an easy thing to to try and get your lick back, try and get your own vengeance, try and get your like, let's just say, for example, when you go into David's story, King Saul, he threw his javelins at David. You know how easy it was to take the javelins and throw the javelins back? I'm not saying that's what David did. I'm just saying, I'm using that as an example. The point is, it's very easy to fall into that carnal mindset, right? But that's not what Jacob did, and that's not what that's not what David did to King Saul, right? The point is, he didn't behave carnal. And you see that the Lord had favor upon Jacob, and he gave those flocks to him, despite the fact that Laban was mistreating him and changing his wages. So, for I am the Most High, who appeared unto you at Bethel, and the place where you anointed the pillar of the stone, and made your vow to me. Now get ready and leave this country and return to the land of your birth. And Rachel and Leah responded, that's fine with us. We won't inherit any of our father's wealth anyway. He has reduced our rights to those of foreign women, and after he sold us, he wasted the money you paid him for us. and the wealth the Most High has given you from you, our father legally belongs to us and our children. So go ahead and do whatever the Most High has told you, right? So, Jacob, had to, he got up and he split, right? And he secretly left, and he did not tell Laban, right? And Laban eventually pursues him, right? They were able to, come to a peaceable resolution. He was able to, kiss his grandchildren, goodbye. But the point is, Jacob had to distance himself from those from Laban, because of how he was treating him. This wasn't justified. It wasn't I should say it like this. It wasn't That's not how you were supposed to treat him, right? And Jacob decided, okay, I have to pull myself back out of this situation, right? Because he's bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. That's close kin, right? So, the same sentiment applies. You might deal with certain people in the sense of, okay, you might deal with them uprightly, and then they're mistreating you. Remember, the Lord sees, our affliction, right? We have receipts of how we dealt with these people, but how they deal with us is really a snare unto them, right? So, um, that's pretty much the point. I kind of wanted to hit, because really and truly, the way Laban dealt with Jacob is really a reflection of Laban. Just like how your relatives, how they deal with you is a reflection on them, and it's not on you, right? Because we deal with them according to, whether it's your parents, whether it's siblings, whether it's, what I'm saying, like, so on and so forth, right? Like, we don't go around a lot of these family members in the like anyways, but you still, sometimes you might have to deal with some of them. Sometimes you might still live with them. Like, every brother kind of has his own situation. Sometimes you might live with, you know you dwell with them, so you try to be, peaceable with them. But sometimes you have to learn, sometimes you might have to just remove yourself from these people, whether it might be physically, like how Jacob was doing, or mentally, if you're not able to actually remove yourself at your situation, at this, point where you are, right? So, I just thought I would, bring this out as an exhortation, in regards to self-respect, of how you think about yourself and value yourself mentally, right? And learning that, okay, these people can't just do anything towards you, because remember, you're precious. And that's something, as Israelite men, we have not been taught. We haven't grown up with this understanding of thinking, and thinking of ourselves in a top value Israelite, man, especially a man who has understanding, right? So, anyways, I just thought I would, touch on this real quick. Hopefully, this lesson was quick and edifying. I just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Yahushai. Until next time, I say Shalom.